Welcome. My name is AC Doomlau, and I use they, them pronouns, and I am calling in from Lenape-Hoking, or New York City. I am the program manager at the Transgender Legal Defense and Education Fund, or TLDEF, and I want to thank you for joining us tonight for Centering Transgender Issues in the Battle for Full Equality, a discussion with transgender and non-binary leaders. A few technical notes. This is a live Zoom webinar being recorded on November 22nd, 2021. This recording will be made available on the TLDEF YouTube page and to registrants of the live webinar. The chat is closed to audience members, but you can submit questions and comments and requests for assistance live via the Q&A function. Live transcript is also available through Zoom. You'll see the closed caption CC symbol in the Zoom navigation bar. This event is made possible with our co-sponsors, Equality Federation, Equality Ohio, and Freedom Oklahoma. A special thank you to TLDEF social media intern T. Mitzok for her co-event planning with me and for running tech during our event. We will begin with a special introduction from TLDEF board member Riley Snorton. Riley is also an American scholar, author, and activist whose work focuses on historical perspectives of gender and race, specifically Black transgender identities. Thank you, Riley, for taking the time to send this introduction, and we'll watch it all now.
Greetings, and welcome to Centering Transgender Issues in the Battle for Full Equality, a discussion with transgender and non-binary leaders. My name is C. Riley Snorton. I'm a writer, professor, and proud board member of the Transgender Legal Defense and Education Fund, or TLDEF. TLDEF is committed to ending discrimination based upon gender identity and expression, and to achieving equality for trans people through public education, test case litigation, direct legal services, and public policy efforts. This afternoon, you'll hear from transgender leaders, Representative Maury Turner of Oklahoma, Mike Webb from Texas and the Equality Federation, and Gio Santiago from Equality Ohio. But before you do, it's my privilege to provide the briefest of introductory remarks. As many of you are aware, last week was Transgender Awareness Week, and on Saturday, November 20th, members of our community also reflected on how violence, particularly lethal against trans women of color, continues to shape our communities on Transgender Day of Remembrance, TDOR. In Chicago, where I'm based, people gathered to march and hold vigil as others organized a tribute show to highlight how the R in TDOR also refers to resilience. This year marks the highest number of trans deaths in the history of its reporting, and we know that the number of anti-trans bills in state legislatures also rose dramatically. As a scholar of Black and trans histories, who's been able to tell the stories of Lucy Hicks Anderson, Georgia Black, Jim McHarris, Ava Betty Brown, among others, I feel glad that these figures are also models for surviving and thriving in difficult times, and eager to hear from today's panel about their leadership, their personal and collective strategies of resilience, and the ongoing work of ensuring our survival. Thanks for tuning in to Centering Transgender Issues in the Battle for Full Equality, and I hope that you'll get a lot out of this event and continue to support the Transgender Legal Defense and Education Fund. Take care.
Thank you again to C. Riley Snorton, our fabulous TLDEF board member. And at this time, I would love to welcome my panelists onto the Zoom stage, Gio, Mike, and Representative Turner. And I was saying before this event that this is kind of old hat for all of us, right? We have been doing these panels and webinars for almost 2 years at this point. And so something that we're really utilizing during this talk is to be using the chat to add bio links and being able to give resources that we're going to share. And so wonderful panelists, if you could do a brief intro of yourself, who you are, your pronouns, who you're with, and then get straight into that convo of what do you think a leader is? And that's open-ended on purpose. So I'm going to go Mike, then Rep Turner, and then Gio.
Happy to kick us off. I am Mike Webb. I am the policy engagement strategist here at the Equality Federation. However, I'm based here in Houston, Texas. And so I have a feeling that we have a lot to contribute to this conversation today. I go by they, them pronouns, came out as trans in 2018. And so my journey may look and be different than a lot of other folks' journeys because I was already in a position of leadership when I came out as trans. So my trans journey has both been public, but also under the microscope of responsibility to our community. So that looks like both recognizing the responsibility that we have in representation, but also trying to intentionally carve out private and personal space to personally connect with myself and my identities that may not be immediately accessible to public consumption. And I think that's the interesting sort of dynamic when it comes to being trans and also being a leader. Is so much of our bodies and so much of our work is immediately expected to be digestible, and what parts of ourselves are just for us and our loved ones.
Thanks so much, Mike. Representative Turner.
Selves, everyone. Yes, my name is Maury Turner. I am the representative for Oklahoma's 88th House District. My pronouns are they and them. I was just elected in November of 2020, so just hitting my 1 year mark here. And a leader to me, right? I guess ultimately, in the most condensed way for me, is that a leader is somebody who's continuously striving, right? Who is working for and to make sure that we are seeing those intersections in all of our fights for liberation. I think like one of our big things, right, or maybe one of my big things, right, is that you can't pick and choose who crosses the finish line of liberation with us, right? And so being as intentional as possible when we are creating and freedom dreaming these beautiful liberation spaces, right, in a very intentional way. Somebody who understands that you don't always have to be out front or be doing big things to be a leader, right? That we all get to be leaders in I guess, truly whatever kind of way we define. But to me, right, I think that's being leaders.
Thank you so much. Gio.
Hi, thank you for having me. Of course, Gio Santiago, he, him, his pronouns. I am the Northeast Ohio Regional Organizer with Equality Ohio based in Cleveland. And so, yeah, for me, being a leader is very much standing up regardless. You know, you have to put yourself in the line of fire. Sometimes you have to hold people accountable, but you also have to find ways to meet people where they are and uplift them and bring them on the journey with you. And sometimes that is by way of just being yourself and telling your story. And sometimes that's finding ways to really like uplift and put others on a platform so they can tell their stories, you know, and knowing when to step up and step back. And especially if you're a person of color, really being able to have that representation is important. And so you have to be a leader almost without a choice sometimes. And so thinking about that and thinking about what that means and being intentional in that is what I think leadership is.
Gosh, I'm just so honored to be here with all of you and so much to talk about. And so I wanted to bring you all together to get to be in your presence, but really talk about your experience of working within LGBTQIA plus activism, however you define that. And what is your experience of, to be very blunt, working with cis white leaders, and why, what brought you here? I said, this is old hat. I'm sure you get asked to be on so many panels, but what is the importance of just talking about it, and do you get to do that? Whoever wants to start.
Yeah, I will say that my journey started because I got mad at white gay people. Because I started off in the HIV field. So I was managing an HIV prevention program here in Houston, Texas that prioritized gay and Latinx gay men. And one day we were doing an HIV testing initiative, and I tested, I believe, 9 Black gay men positive that day in a row, like back to back. I had to let people know that their lives were completely changed. And I just happened to get on social media when I was done for the day. And I saw all these like activists, advocates, white gays talking about other things that was not about what I just experienced that day and what so many other Black and brown LGBTQ community members experience when it comes to fighting HIV. And so as I started yelling at white gays about like reprioritizing what our agenda looks like, what we're fighting for, because lives are still being impacted by things that I felt the movement thought was left, like history, part of our history, 80s, 90s. We're not dealing with HIV today. I've learned that there is an expectation often of LGBTQ communities of color to integrate ourselves into white spaces. However, that investment is never returned, or hardly ever returned. We hardly ever see our white cis gay counterparts learning about our cultures, our communities, our norms, our communication norms, our issues that impact us as queer folks of color. And right now, I think we're in a space where as a movement, we're struggling with that, right? We're recognizing, especially in the fights for criminal justice reform, and we're seeing all these reminders that America is quite frankly a racist country, both systematically and when it comes to how we consume products, information, and bodies. We're recognizing that something more needs to be done in our movement. I think we're in a point where we don't know what that is. What are the next steps? What does it look like in practice? What does it look like beyond words? And that's where we are right now.
Thank you, Mike. Just wanted to connect something from a few minutes ago of talking about making yourself digestible, talking about integration, assimilation, something Gio you said about what it means to be a leader, Rep Turner about, you know, what the last year has been like for you. So just, again, really excited about this. So Gio, I see a lot of head nodding. You have something to say about that?
I do, you know, and I think, you know, to Mike's point, like getting mad is, I think, where it all really starts with us. And for me, it was a little bit of the getting mad, but just also like, what is happening every day? For me, it was like, what was happening? And I think it was, you know, I started doing this work, you know, a long time ago also. And it was kind of a parallel to my own personal transition, you know, and so really seeing that the world was just like, first, you know, 9 years ago when I started to medically transition, even just social media and the internet, it was vastly different. You know, you couldn't look up anything, you know, really about being trans. And then what you did see was like white trans men or, you know, white trans women. And so seeing that and then coming into this work and then seeing that those were still the people that are populating the spaces that are supposed to be for the community, regardless of if it is a space that is in policy work or in direct services. And you're like, wow, so no matter what, I'm always going to have to work with cis white people in this. And even in starting my own nonprofit, you know, it's like I still have to deal with cis white people and other cis white leaders. And, you know, and also even now being with Equality Ohio, you know, cis white leaders there, you know, and I know we talk a lot internally about using our racial equity lens. And so we're doing a good job with that and, you know, looking at the strategic plan of what that looks like, but there's still so much work to do. And I think no matter what, we're always going to have to deal with that. And so I think, unfortunately, we have to find a way to navigate that does least harm to us. Because at the end of the day, they're going to always have funding blocked. They're always going to have, you know, ways for us to have to jump through fire rings, even in doing our own things. And so I think least harm for ourselves is the only way to navigate cis white leadership.
Thank you, Gio. And, Rep. Turner, hearing Gio talk about having to work with white cis people, you are in the Oklahoma House. So what is your thought about this? And I do want to kind of loop in the next question of talking about your work in your home state through talking about your space and leadership with the identities you hold.
Yeah. Also, just like going back a little bit, I always like forget what exactly I should be doing and or saying. So I also want to say, like, I also sit on the board of Freedom Oklahoma here too. So wanted to make sure I say that too. But yeah, so I mean, quite honestly, like when I first moved to Oklahoma City, like I think, I don't know, it was probably a couple of months before I moved. I was here watching a friend's kickball game, like they have those adult kickball leagues. And so everybody went out afterwards, and I was getting ready to head back home to Stillwater, Oklahoma at the time, but I went ahead and went out with, I guess, my friend's kickball team. And I guess essentially what I'm saying is the very first time that anybody ever called me the N-word here in House District 88 was a white gay man. And his explanation for it was that 33% of his office was Black and that he had faced oppression. And so he gets it, right? Therefore, that absolves him and he is able to oppress other people, right? Which I think is like very ironically funny. It's like, okay, like I've hurt in some way, shape, or form too. So so it's okay for me to hurt you, right? But I ultimately also one of those things, right? Much so like you, Mike, is that I got angry in these spaces, right? Where folks continuously say like, these are your allies, or I'm an ally, and this is who you have to use to be able to get things done. I was tired of it, and I was ready so we could be our own representation, right? Because our communities are often first up on the chopping block, especially when it comes to legislation, like the first carve outs, whenever people start saying like, oh, well, this would have been a good bill, but let's take this part out, right? And I was tired of that. So I started looking for somebody to run for office because I also didn't want to run for office. But it is like that I can echo those sentiments, and I absolutely share them, is that like that was the thing. I was frustrated with the leadership. Now, mind you, the person that I ran against was a white cishet man, right? But the big thing, right, in our 2S LGBTQ plus community was that this white cishet man was a really good ally. And so it was a lot of like uphill, like a really big uphill battle to get our white queer folks to see that like, while he might be good representation for you, the rest of us are quite literally dying out here, right? Like, and when you do make good legislation or what you think is good legislation, have you really talked to communities, or did you just say like, oh, we know conversion therapy is bad, let's ban it, right? But did you actually talk to people in the community about like what makes good legislation, right? Like places where our shared lived experience really helps, especially if we have allies that don't actually understand it and aren't actually talking to us, right? And so I think that was kind of like that big push, which also is, I think, equal parts like what it's like to work in this space. But also like now actually being in this seat, there's also this push around how like you're the queer person, right? And so like everything falls on you. Like nobody else is like, oh, okay, like, and we're also learning and growing and doing this together to learn to be better allies. Because I personally am of the mindset that you don't get to tell me you're my ally. I get to tell you, yeah, you've shown up, you've done the work, you are my ally. And so also like that kind of being able to highlight that and also push people to be better allies is one thing that is heavy work, but I appreciate that I get to do it. The part about like folding it into like what people say about the state, like we live in the South Midwestern kind of region here. And so I think the big thing, right, overarching is that people think like the South and the Midwest are a lost cause. Like they will cling to the coastal states, right, or the swing states. They're like, this is where I need to develop my time, right? But I think House District 88 really shows that communities are fighting, right? Fighting to be heard, fighting to be our own representation in a really robust way, right? That really highlights the work that Stacey Abrams is doing and like everybody, right? And so like if people really did spend as much time, right, if we had allies who truly did care about us, and they would, right, not say like, oh, okay, like the South, the Midwest, right, is a lost cause, but they would jump on board here, right? And so, but I also think like people think of the South or the Midwest being a lost cause also plays into the misconception like that people aren't here thriving, right? That people aren't here surviving.
Right.
And I think that's kind of like my big thing with, sorry, you can hear like my dog like running around. She's like getting ready to ramp up right now. So, I think that those are kind of like some of the big misconceptions about specifically Oklahoma, right? Is that it's a lost cause and that people aren't fighting, right? And that's a very common misconception. And I think House District 88 really shows that.
Thank you so much, Maury. And so I want to hear about Texas and I want to hear about Ohio, but I want to take that and kind of talk a little bit about like federal versus state, particularly your state, right? And so thinking about federal anti-discrimination protections, it's no surprise. I think a lot of our movement has been watching the Equality Act excitedly and then waiting on it. And then, at the same time, we're living in our states and we are this patchwork of protections or no protections at all. And so I thought, Mike, I would tap you since you are at Equality Fed now, but I do want to hear about your local Texas work. Tell me about your work at the national level, but also how your work in Texas kind of informed that. And then I also have so much to ask you about about Ohio next. So take it from there.
Yeah, I can start off with the Equality Act. The Equality Act is important because it will provide consistent and explicit non-discrimination protections for LGBTQ people across key areas of life, including employment, housing, credit, education, public spaces and services, federally funded programs, and jury services. It's important because half of LGBTQIA Americans live in states without adequate civil rights protections, including here in Texas. So it would make a huge difference in states like Texas, I would imagine Oklahoma and Ohio. There's need for an Equality Act because, as AC just mentioned, LGBTQ lives should not depend on patchwork policy legislation just to live and thrive. And that speaks on why the work, and I so appreciate what Representative Turner said about oftentimes our states are written off as lost causes, right? Let's forget about these red states because like California, DC, New York, even Nevada now we can invest in them, and Georgia now, right? But what's amazing to me about states like Texas is we have some pretty resilient advocates and communities who are fighting, like, I don't know if I can curse on this platform, are fighting very, very hard to make sure that not only all Texans have a higher quality of life, but creating these communities that protect each other, empower each other, and love on each other. And I think oftentimes when we write off states as lost causes, we're writing off and erasing all these LGBTQ lives that are quite frankly making history in our states. And I promise you, I'm going to answer your state-specific question in 2 seconds. And so what has happened in Texas is because we don't have something like the Equality Act, only 14% of our state is protected by LGBTQ non-discrimination policies, only 14%. And guess what? Houston, the 4th largest city in America, is not included in that. Houston does not have a non-discrimination ordinance that protects LGBTQIA Houstonians. And we face an obscene amount of anti-LGBTQ bills, as we've seen in the past 3 legislative sessions our governor insisted on having. But thankfully, we have advocates like and advocacy organizations like Equality Texas and the Transgender Education Network of Texas, or TENT, who have defeated 74 anti-LGBTQ bills over 3 special sessions. And I think that's really important to highlight, because normally in Texas, we as progressives or liberals or Democrats, even though I know we're nonpartisan, so we as progressives don't have a fight in the game. Like, we get defeated in the first session. We get defeated session number 1, and then we go home, lick our wounds, and try to heal over 2 years and fight back in 2 years. Not this time. Equality Texas and TENT pushed our governor into 3 special sessions. And that was very, very unusual. And quite frankly, I think more needs to be praised on these teams, because that's never happened. And since I've been involved in LGBTQ organizing and advocacy. And so because of their hard work, they were able to defeat 74 bills. And like many other sessions, a lot of those bills specifically target our trans communities. And unfortunately, Texas was one of the 9 states that passed an anti-trans athletes bill. It should be noted that LGBTQ communities in Texas weren't the only communities targeted. Texas also passed one of the most grotesque and inhumane anti-abortion bills we've seen in the entire nation. And Texas also passed one of the most extreme voter suppression bills we've seen in the entire nation. But I cannot put praise and energetic love enough on these strong advocates like TENT and like the Equality Texas team over there at Equality Texas, who never gave up, regardless of being tired after session 1, still returning for session 2 and then 3. It could have been a lot worse than the trans athletes bill, even though we will make sure to continue fighting that in the courts in the years and months to come.
Thank you, Mike. Gio, I'd love to hear about your on the ground work in Ohio.
Yeah. So as Mike said, Ohio is one of the states that does not have statewide protection. So, we've been working a little bit with Freedom for All Americans and PFLAG and whatnot to really shift a little bit to pushing the Equality Act and calling for some accountability there from Senator Portman, and really wanting to figure out what that looks like, as a whole, because we know that in Ohio, not having those statewide protections, we've been really driving home the Ohio Fairness Act for about 11 years. And we were getting a little bit of traction, and then they stalled us out again. And so that was one of the other reasons why we shifted to really focusing on the Equality Act, because we're like, okay, if we can get it, nationally, then we don't have to worry about it as much on the statewide level at the moment, although we would still kind of push for that. And so at this point, we have 35 cities and 1 county across the state of Ohio that have a non-discrimination. And so really looking at that and seeing that there are some places that are really fighting for this and really wanting this to happen is important. And that's important on the groundwork. And so for me, I always talk about how Ohio is a very weird state. And I said this a couple of days ago when I was on this other panel. I'm like, Ohio is like a southern state, but just kind of up north. And people really don't think about it. It's like you hear things that are happening in like Alabama, Oklahoma, and Texas. And I'm like, that's Ohio. Like, that's the same right here. It's not progressive. It's not as purple as it used to be, and so really thinking about the fact that it's like Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati, and then much more rural area. That's really what Ohio looks like. That plays a large part into a lot of this non-discrimination stuff, because you're thinking about going into communities where, first off, there's not any Black and brown people. And second off, they're thinking that there are no LGBTQIA identified people, when we know that that is not true. And so it just makes it very hard sometimes to really get people to understand why it's necessary. And when we're working with cities to pass ordinances, obviously the cities are coming to us. We don't go into the cities to do that, but it can take anywhere from, 3 months to 7 years. And I just assisted the city of Oberlin in passing their non-discrimination ordinance, and it took 7 years. Oberlin, we're Oberlin colleges. And I tell people this all the time, like they're progressive and they're liberal, but guess what? That is the college. That's not the city. And it's vastly different, and then we have other places in our state, like Medina, which is very rural in comparison to like Cleveland and stuff, although it is very city. But, we had two like badass moms there that were like driving it. And so they were like assisting us in, getting people educated, and they like did not let up. And so for me, looking at that, and so I have to, like Mike did, like shout out these people who are advocates who are doing the work. So, shout out to Mama Sandy and Amy, because they're like, our kids matter, and we are like gonna make sure that people know this. And so that took almost 2 years to get that work done. And so it's still just like the grind. And so on another side, like as far as trans leadership, I'm like one of like 3 Black trans men that are like really like on the ground doing a lot of work in the state of Ohio that are like known by name. I'm probably like the most known by name in, statewide, but like there's some people in, Northeast Ohio, like Darius Stubbs, who are like just working really hard, and Chris Goings and, in Columbus. But that's 3 Black trans men that are doing it. And there's like, we have obviously Equality Ohio that's doing the work in Trans Ohio, which is our statewide trans org, but they're also volunteer based. So nobody there is getting paid to do the work that they're doing, like legal clinics and name change clinics, and that's, so shout out to people like James Knapp that are driving that, because we're doing this all like from love and from the need, and so, like even running my own organization, we're like people boots on the ground. We don't get the funding. We don't get like the money that they send to like these LGBT centers and some of these other state orgs. We're like, oh, hey, AC, you love me? Awesome. Thanks for donating. I can keep doing the work. That's what this looks like. And that's a part of the problem. The people who are like really on the ground doing the hard work are the people who don't get enough credit and don't get enough funding. And the people who are getting the coins, they're like, oh yeah, I'm an ally, or yeah, like I'm doing the work. And you're like, but are you really? And so it's frustrating. It's so frustrating. And Ohio sucks. And I hate it here, but I can't move, because if I move, who's going to keep doing the work? And that's the problem that we face as trans people and as a community as a whole.
Thank you so much, all of you. So much head nodding. It's just really nice to see. So who is going to keep doing the work, right? So you all are here, you're known leaders, and we're talking about leadership, but you didn't hop out of the wherever people hop out of as leaders, right? So we kind of alluded to this in some of your stories at the beginning. Rep Turner saying that you were trying to find someone to run, like Mike, you got really angry as you were like moving up in your HIV/AIDS advocacy work. So each 3 of you can't do all of the work in your states or nationally. How do we get it done? How are we going to get more leaders? And what is that the tactic that we use?
I think for me personally, I came from a community organizing background. Like not only like was it my job, but that was also the like environment I was raised in with my mother and my grandmother. And so there's always been this very kind of core notion about community organizing, right, and community care. And so when because before becoming elected, I worked for the ACLU of Oklahoma and specialized in justice system reimagining and rebuilding, right? And the thing that I did there that I'm going to do here that I'll probably continue to do, right, until I die, right, is that one of my big driving things is that I'm always trying to work myself out of a job. Like I'm always trying to make sure that I'm sharing everything that I learn with everybody else. So like our internship program is to train people like on the different parts of a campaign, right? Between issue-based campaigns and political campaigns, right? How do we share the knowledge? How are we continuously bringing people into the fold of community organizing? Because that is not like a science that you go off, you learn in uni and you come back, right? Like that's something that we learned probably in revival tents, right? Making sure that we're breaking bread with people, sitting down in coffee shops like that. People will tell you everything that you need to know about their lives and their struggles, right? And like over a cup of coffee, quite honestly. And so making sure that we are continuously sharing those aspects, because like so much of community organizing literally boils down to being curious, right? About your neighbors, about what's going on in your neighborhood, right? About how we can fix it, how we can create something better. And so making sure not only so our interns like come from all over the US. And so making sure that we are sharing that information, right, in a very like in a way that is accessible to folks, but also is like not sugarcoated either, because it's very hard work too. I think that's a big thing, is that sometimes getting into the work, a lot of people think like, oh, like this is going to be great, this is going to be easy, and it's not. There's no part about it that is, right? And so also making sure that we're being honest about being comfortable with the uncomfortable part of it. And like Gio hinted on something earlier, but like, it's not just that we get to go into these spaces, right? And that we are being our own representation, but it's also the weight of that intersectionality too, right? Like if I could go into the office and be a white cis het man from Southeastern Oklahoma and do the work and get everything done just like they do, it'd be one thing, right? But I have coworkers that won't look at me, that won't talk to me, right? Like these are chairs of committees where my bills are supposed to be heard. And if they think that I don't exist and they act like that, then it makes the job impossible sometimes. And so I think the best elected officials, right, at any level are folks who are actively in community, figuring out like, how do we fill the gaps if we don't get positive, like if we don't get progressive legislation passed, right? Like who is already doing this work and how do we amplify those voices? So I guess it's a lot, right? But I think the really kind of point of it for me is to always work myself out of a job. And I do that by always sharing every piece of knowledge that I learn. And also I'm a bit of an overthinker. So I think my district really kind of likes when I'm like, hey, are you sure that this is the best possible legislation? Like, are we missing some lenses? Because people don't do that too often in politics. So for me, I think, well, I guess that's my answer.
Thank you, Representative Turner. And Mike, I saw you on mute, but I wanted to kind of add a little touch on this to say, dream world, everyone attending this panel is ranked their senator. We passed the Equality Act, right? We have federal anti-discrimination policies that protect us, not just sexuality, gender identity, expression, religion, but the work doesn't stop there, right? So I just wanted to tag that on to your thoughts here, Mike, on leadership, what you're saying, Rep. Turner, about working yourself out of a job, being curious, keeping the work going, because the three of you also deserve rest.
Oh, I was going to actually make a comment about how can we move Representative Turner to Texas, because I want their leadership here. They could teach a couple of other elected officials down here some lessons, including those who are on our side. No, to answer the question, I think there needs to be real investment, right? And so like we as a movement oftentimes say like, oh, we need to be uplifting BIPOC individuals. We need to be investing in Black trans leadership specifically and protect Black trans lives. Black trans lives matter. And we also like to highlight these disparities, right? To highlight this point that we're woke. But we do nothing for the in-between journey. So we know that Black trans folks get the brunt of everything, the most criminalized, the least access to healthcare, the least access to higher education, et cetera. And we also have this value system that we need to hire more Black trans folks in positions of leadership, not just outreach coordinators. Not saying outreach coordinators is not a significant and impactful position to be in. It changes lives. But we need folks who make decisions on funding. We need folks who make decisions on budgets. But we do nothing towards like, so how can we fill this gap, right? How can we help complement this education gap that we know exists. There's disparity, there's lack of access to education. How can we invest in leadership development programs? That costs money. And I was fortunate enough to be brought into organizing through a leadership development program here in Houston, which by the way does not exist anymore because it costs money and the organization couldn't sustain it anymore. And so like for me, I don't really pay attention to the talk anymore unless I'm seeing some dollar signs behind that talk. From any organization. I'm fortunate enough right now to be part of the Equality Federation that is investing beyond non-discrimination protections, and it has been for years. Like we work with state partners to leverage advocacy around HIV/AIDS policies, which is something, as you know, I get mad. I'm still mad about that, by the way. So I wasn't just initiated into organizing because I was mad. I am still mad to this day. But fortunately, I'm part of an organization that feels that anger with me. And we're working with our state partners to advance HIV-related causes, focusing on most impacted lives. So like we bring in trans lives into the conversations and not just into community conversations, but how policies specifically impact Black and brown trans lives as we're talking about stopping the HIV epidemic here in this country. We're partnering with SAGE, the world's largest organizing dedicated to improving lives of older LGBTQIA folks, because oftentimes there's so many intersections that impact our movement. And if it's not, quite frankly, within that 18 to 40-year-old age range, white cisgender white men purview, it's dead to us. And I'm happy to be part of an aspect, a component of our movement that is trying to be more intentional about making sure that we are doing something with that gap. But it requires more than one national organization, quite frankly. I think it requires all of us. It requires every single state partner, part of our coalition, all 43. Oh, I'm saying stuff I might get in trouble for later. And it requires all of our allies as well. I think it requires us actually putting action behind our words. I no longer want to see a hashtag that says Black Trans Lives Matter. I want to see an opportunity that show that Black trans lives matter.
Thank you so much, Mike. We are at the 45 past the hour mark and time is running. So I want to just keep this conversation going and speak towards Saturday was TDOR. I opened my email. I have a bunch of emails from our sibling orgs, national state orgs. It's TDOR. We're remembering. And talk to me about how do we keep this attention going? I feel this, and I'm a non-Black person of color, trans person, TDOR, TDOV, Pride Month. Everyone wants to talk to us. Everyone wants our opinion. But what about the other months? And what about those special sessions? And what about the times that we're not being looked towards? What are your thoughts about that? I see some nodding.
Let me start because I'm about to be petty. My absolute favorite thing is when people grovel in TDOR and TDOV and Pride Month to trans people and Black and brown people. It makes me laugh because they like just dog us out all of these other months, as you said. And then it's like, oh, TDOR, we need somebody Black and trans to speak. Can you come do the thing? And like, it's that washing with the rainbow or with the trans flag and everything that happens. And we know that it's going to happen. It happens every year. It's the same. My question is, how are we preparing ourselves when that happens? And so, as trans people, as people of color, like, what does that look like when these requests come in? And so for me, I have now relished in the fact that I get to do this, all year as a job. I get to do it with Equality Ohio, and I'm very thankful that Equality Ohio allows me to still operate my own nonprofit and the professional public speaking that I do and all of that. And so my philosophy is, as Mike said, like, if I'm not seeing dollars with it, I'm not even having any conversations. Like, I don't speak for free. That's just me, period. And if it's TDOR and it's TDOV and it's this June, it's an upcharge. And if you don't like it, then you can find somebody else, because at the end of the day, you came to me. I didn't come to you. And so leveraging our weight in that is one thing that I feel like we can do, because it's like we already know we're going to be pulled on. How do we not allow ourselves to be tokenized? And so if I'm choosing you to do this, then you're not tokenizing me because I said, okay, I'm going to do this. But then also taking that and finding a way to use that platform in a way that is beneficial to me, to my people, to the work. And so I'm always getting the coins. That's me. And I'm waking up every day now choosing violence. I don't care because I have to wake up every day Black and trans. And so I'm rooting for everybody Black and brown. As someone who also, is Afro Latinx, that's everybody Black and brown, everybody trans, everybody else can get some if I got some left after that. And that's it. And that's all, because self-preservation is key at this point, because if I'm going to pass the torch, I have to still have some fire left in it to pass the torch. And so that's where I'm trying to do this now.
Gio, Rep Turner, do you have any thoughts on that before we move to the next kind of last 10 minutes, actually?
No, I think that's something like a concept that I'm still kind of grappling with. Like I rarely get on Facebook anymore, but I made a post the other day because like in this past year, like since being elected, people have really asked me to do some of the most outlandish things, like, and for free, like literally sign away my likeliness, like all of these things. And I'm like, if you do love me, right? If you do respect me as a friend, and for you to like, I literally represent one of the wealthiest districts in the state and can barely afford to pay rent here, right? And I think people don't truly like understand the amount, one, that they ask people to do things outside of their like actual job description. And two, that they think because I love this work, because it is my livelihood, that I'll die broke because of it. And so I'm just like listening to what you're saying, Gio, and I'm like, yeah, right. But trying to, because I'm always like one of those people that like people ask me to do it because I'll always say yes. I'm always like, oh yes, absolutely. And I'm like, I work well over 40 hours a week. I need to like figure out a better way, right, to do it all, right? And so I don't know if I really have something of value to to share right here, but absolutely, Gio, your sentiments deeply hit me right here. So
Thank you all. And I am so grateful that you're all here. I was messaging Mike earlier. I want to make myself scarce, but I am so grateful to have you all here. Through, Equality Federation is how I got connected with Freedom Oklahoma. Creating Change is how I got connected with Equality Ohio, and then going back to the summit and having these connections where, we, the four of us, plus all of our amazing co-sponsors, everyone else that's in the Equality Act Coalition, want to get this Equality Act passed, and to have you all together is amazing. But what's really important to me, because I know I'm taking your time, is in our closing few minutes, I would love to hear from each of you any closing thoughts that you haven't been able to share about this topic, and then plug what you're doing, tell me what to look out for, tell the people who are tuned in where they can send their money, where they can send their support. Like, this is your space as we, get to the end of this hour. So whoever wants to go first. Or I'll call
Okay,
on
I'll
you.
go first.
Thanks. Yeah.
So I think, for me in closing, just really it being intentional when you are pulling on Black and brown people, and Black and brown trans people specifically, because like I said, we already know the requests are going to come. Be mindful of that. If somebody is a yes person, be mindful in the way that you're pulling on them. It's like, if you are coming to the same people all the time, are you actually doing the work to find somebody else? Or are you just coming to the same well that you're hoping is not dry? And that's how I'm looking at things in this life. And so, I know we need allies, and we need white allies, and sometimes what their job is writing a check and getting out of the way. We don't need you to talk, we don't need you to preach, we don't need you to teach. Sometimes writing the check and getting out of the way, and then being in the background. And if we call upon you, be ready, because my grandmother and my parents always told me, if you stay ready, you ain't got to get ready. And so that's what I need from, you know, allies and other people. And then, you know, donating to those grassroots organizations. Like I said, you know, it's no shade to, you know, any of the centers that are out there, but we know that they get the funding, you know. So like I said, I've had Meta for almost 6 years, and I've gotten 2 grants in 6 years. So donate to Meta, because I appreciate that. And I appreciate being able to continue to do the work. Trans Ohio, like I said, you know, that's a volunteer-led organization. And so I know oftentimes the people who are volunteering doing that work are also pouring out of their own pockets. Somebody send Rep Turner some money, please, because they need the coins too, you know, because we need them to keep in office. So that fundraising is going to happen. So, you know, I have to uplift you because, you know, I know you might not say it yourself. So drop that fundraising button there so that way you can get some coins too. And that's what we have to do. If you see somebody who you know needs it, sharing and resharing. If you can't donate, talk about it, uplift it, and share it again.
Yeah, I don't want to follow Representative Turner, so I'm gonna do my spiel now. I would just say in closing words, and I think I probably said this a couple of times throughout my comments, but just to reemphasize the point, it's challenging as a Black queer person to always have to fight the mentality that if it doesn't impact the white, queer, cisgendered male, then it's not an LGBTQ issue, right? And that's just completely false. And imagine how much more powerful our community can be if we think more expansively, if we were able to really look at the full spectrum of the LGBTQIA community. We will see, quite frankly, that voting rights is an LGBTQ issue. We will see that reproductive health and rights is an LGBTQ issue. We will see that even gerrymandering is an LGBTQ issue. And how can we do a better job both as individual advocates, whether you're white, Black, and or of color, of not only allying ourselves with other movements that are like-minded, because they do impact LGBTQ lives, but also be a real partner in those fights as well. And that's just the message I would love to leave all of our like-minded advocates who are joining us today's heart. And if you feel inclined to donate money, of course, I'm going to unplug Equality Federation. You can go to equalityfederation.org right now and drop some $ in the donate button. You can even put in the comment section that I want this to go to HIV programming. And I would personally love you and send you a thank you email. But if you like, I don't really care about the nation like that, don't worry, I got you too. You go to our member section and you can see which state do you do care about. And you could donate to our state partners in those states. In Texas, for example, you could donate to Equality Texas or TENT, Transgender Education Network of Texas. And so we have plenty of options for where your money can go. Just let us know and we can direct them.
Yeah, I think for me, a couple of things really quickly. One, there's this question here, and it's like, how do you deal with the weight of intersectionality while in leadership? I want to make sure I answer this because this is also one of my interns too. So thank you so much for hopping on and asking a question, Manal. I think one, if you've got the finances to be able to do it, therapy is something that is very, very helpful, useful, right? Because when I don't want to bother my friends with having them bear emotional weight with me, therapy is absolutely wonderful. Also, right, having a really good group of friends that are able and willing to bear some emotional weight with me is really, really important and has been needed more this past year than I ever could have really thought. Intersectionality is something that's very, I mean, it looks different for all of us, right? And me being Black, queer, gender diverse, Muslim in the buckle of the Bible Belt is a different feeling altogether. But having a really good support system is a really good start. My final kind of closeout words, I think somebody had dropped my website in there earlier, and it's just moreyturner.com. And so there you can find everything that we are doing. There's a link to get involved. So if you don't live in state and you want to volunteer, we still like phone banking, texting, all like those things. We have people do all across the US. So, which I think is like very kind of special and unique for a state level race. But so if that's something that you're interested in, would love to have you get involved that way. Quality time is my top language of love. Donations are too now. So if you do want to donate, I think one of the big things, right, is like if you could set up a monthly reoccurring donation of $2, then that's enough for me, right? I think it's really important that we start, that I think people in kind of like all races, right, at all levels really value the smaller dollars, because sometimes people think like, oh, you aren't okay with my $5, so you really don't care about me, right? And I remember being one of those people, right? And $2 is all I can, like, I have a reoccurring donation for my campaign for $2. So like, I'm not going to ask you to do anything that I wouldn't do myself. And I think that's really the another big thing, right? Is that those donations, like donations of finances and specifically like donations of time, are very, very important to being able to thrive and to continue to be our own representation. So I think that's my closeout.
I always, something as a moderator, I leave those last 10 minutes because it's all about the panelists. And so panelists, check out some chat right now that's coming to us about how you are heroes and incredible, which is true. This hour went by incredibly quickly, but I think that just means that people need to follow all of you and see your next engagements and all your work. And I'm going to start doing some nice closeout words, but I'm incredibly grateful. And so thank you, everyone, again, both live and watching recorded, for joining us at Calling All Families, Centering Transgender Issues in the Battle for Full Equality. We have lots of great links that are in the chat and will also be in the chat in the recorded version. And we'll be following up with registrants with the recording, as well as all the amazing resources listed here and the contact info for our panelists. We also want to thank our co-sponsors again, which, if you followed the intros, are related to our amazing panelists. So thank you, Equality Federation, Equality Ohio, and Freedom Oklahoma. Again, I'm AC Dumlau, they, them pronouns, with the Transgender Legal Defense and Education Fund, or TLDEF. And we just wish you a great night, or whatever time it is you are, and stay in touch for future programming. Thank you so much for being here tonight.